This is a presentation of the skills of policy practice in social work. I am Reggie York. At the completion of this presentation, you will be able to first identify four major categories of skills employed in private and policy practice in social work. What are the major categories of skills for this kind of practice? Number two, explain how the skills of analysis, organization of action, persuasion, and communication are employed in policy practice. These are the four categories of skills mentioned in the first statement. Number three, explain the nature of critical thinking in policy practice. Also explain how power can be effectively used in persuasion. And finally, explain the role of historical analysis in our understanding of policy practice. Categories of skill. One is analysis. How clearly can we analyze the situation that leads to the policy? As social workers, we have certain expertise that will be called upon potentially by policy makers of various kinds, like legislators and so forth. Number two, organization of action. How do you organize people to make sure that a certain policy is implemented? Number three, persuasion. You have to persuade people that a certain policy is the right thing to do. Number four, communication. That's so critical in so many aspects of the policy practice process that you will be engaged in as a social worker. Let's talk briefly about the skill of analysis. Look at this, hit the pause button, read this over, and come back. So we're talking about organizational problem solving. There are lots of things you can learn about that. That systematic problem solving is useful because it illuminates the nature of the problem, the reasons for it, and then guides one's actions in regard to what policies are most appropriate. So those are the things that that's why I'm referring to organizational problem solving as being a part of the skill of analysis, or where the skill of analysis can be useful. Analysis has a lot to do with breaking things down into their component parts, showing the relationship of those parts so as to illuminate for all who hear the reasons why you are proposing a certain kind of policy. So let's look a little bit at systematic problem solving, which follows a logical sequence. Number one, let me ask you this question. Do you define the problem in terms of a single solution? Is this a good idea? Think about it. If you say the problem is we don't have enough computers in our Department of Social Services, is this the way to state the problem? Or would it be better stated as the department is inadequately resourced for completing necessary paperwork, reports, and so forth? The latter would be better because that states the nature of the problem. That's not in terms of a single solution. More computers may be one alternative, but there may be others as well. Number two, why would you analyze the causes of the problem? Well, one of the reasons you do that is it helps guide you in deciding what is a good solution if you understand the causes of the problem. Would you employ special tools for generating alternatives? Well, you could certainly do that. It would be useful for you to get a better handle on what's going on. Number four, would you clearly articulate the bases for comparing alternatives? These are, in one word, part of systematic problem solving. Let's talk briefly about critical thinking. Hit the pause button and look over this complicated slide, and then we'll talk. So as you can see here, critical thinking is all about breaking things down. It's a lot about transparency, but it's also about analysis and logic and so forth. It helps you to portray something in its best form for other people to understand and follow, because you're using logic and you're being transparent. Historical analysis, according to these two authors. Policy analysis often includes historical analysis, which deals with such issues as what programs or policies dealt with this problem in the past. If you are talking to legislators, for example, they will very often want to know what's happened, what's been the history of this. Number two, how has the present policy evolved over time? That's sometimes useful also when you're making the presentation, trying to persuade someone about it. What does history teach us? That's a very interesting question. The next one is the present proposal informed by history. So sometimes it's very good and persuasive for you to be able to put your policy proposal into historical perspective. Here are some lessons from policy analysis given by these two authors. The first thing they said is the bottom line is the bottom line. What they mean by that is that social policy is subservient to economic policy, meaning how the money is being spent, how much money is needed, and so forth is really the most important thing that many legislators and other policy makers want to focus their attention upon. Number two, policies that are both compassionate for the underprivileged and protective of the society as a whole have greater chance for success than those that are not. So if you're really advocating for underprivileged people, you might want to see if there is a way to portray it not just as this is good for the underprivileged and wouldn't you want to do that based on your values, but also show how it's good for society as a whole. Perhaps underprivileged people will more likely get a job and so forth. Number three, ideology drives policy more than data. This is again the opinion of the two authors up there who have written books on policy. Next, we should be realistic in our expectations. Compare policy results to alternative policies, not some high standard. Just try to be realistic. Also, don't expect to meet all of your need or achieve spectacular results. Be realistic about what your expectations are about what you might be able to accomplish. The next thing I want to talk about is the idea of coalitions. Coalitions are normally a part of an action plan that typically draw together groups of people. Coalitions refer to when you're pulling together more than one organization or more than one group of people into a concerted action. That's what I mean by a coalition. Once they are identified, they are called together. Then they typically negotiate goals, priorities, strategies, and so forth. Leadership is a key to effective use of coalitions for policy practice. Leadership is another important skill. It's all about influence, getting people to do what you want them to do. In policy practice, you must be a good leader. Good leaders hit the pause button and look over those things. These are just some of the many characteristics of a good leader. You could look up the other characteristics and find dozens of additional ones, but these are just a few of the ones that I wanted to see you, have you examine. The skill of persuasion. Persuasion is about influence on the behavior of others. It is at the heart of advocacy and policy practice because you have to persuade policy makers to enact a certain policy. It is informed about knowledge regarding the use of power. Here's a few things. If you will hit the pause button, read this over, and then come back. This shows a couple things about different types of power and how it might be most effective. For example, using your relationship skill and your expert skill, meaning your ability to relate to people and your expertise on something, is more likely to lead to psychological commitment than would be the case of using reward power or position power or coercive power. Those are just one major lesson about the use of power and being realistic about what you need to do in order to accomplish a certain thing. Here are 6 weapons of persuasion, according to this author. I thought was noteworthy. Reciprocity is the first. People tend to return a favor. If you can help somebody out, they're more likely to help you out later. Commitment. People tend to be consistent with commitments they have verbalized. So getting someone to verbalize that they embrace a certain value or a certain policy is a step forward in your policy practice. If they will verbalize, yes, I'm in favor of this, they're more likely to go forward with it. Social proof. People do things they see others doing. Authority. People tend to obey authority. And liking. People are influenced by those they like. So these are some of the things, along with scarcity, that are weapons of persuasion, things that will influence your effectiveness at persuading. The enemies of critical thinking I want to talk about. One would be cherry picking. Cherry picking means selecting information that supports a particular position and systematically ignoring information that does not. The straw man, that's to say, trying to divert attention away from the heart of the matter. Dichotomous thinking and other forms of incomplete analysis. If someone says to you, because you voted against the school bond, that must mean you don't like children. Well, you could vote for the school bond and like children. You could vote for the school bond and not like children. You could vote against the school bond and like children. You could vote against the school bond and not like children. There are 4 options there, not just 1 or 2. Attacking the messenger rather than the message. We've talked about that a lot in our lives, I'm sure. The skill of communication. Communication is the primary vehicle. Presenting your argument concisely and well-focused is a critical skill. Body language is also important in communication. And it's been suggested by many that you should avoid phrases that distract from the issue, meaning keep yourself focused when you're communicating, and use the media effectively. Here is a summary. Good policy practice entails 1, the ability to present a credible analysis, 2, the ability to organize action, 3, the ability to persuade, and 4, the ability to communicate. I hope this has been useful for you. This is the end of my presentation.